Welcome, everybody. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the release of Return to Oz, the Disney adventure based on Ozma of Oz, with parts of the Marvelous Land of Oz and the MGM movie thrown in as well. When the movie appeared, it wasn't a big box office or critical success, but some people loved it. And over the years since, Return to Oz has gained more fans through home viewing, even as we've seen other interpretations of the Oz mythos on screens. With more than a third of the century passed since audiences first saw Return to Oz, the organizers of the OzCon and the Oz Club conventions thought that this would be a good time to assess the movie and where it stands in the Oz mythos and in American fantasy filmmaking. So we've arranged this panel of Return to Oz at 35 years. Our panelists here today are Sarah Crotzer, the current editor-in-chief of the Balmbugle, the journal of the International Wizard of Oz Club. She teaches English and film at Volunteer State Community College near Nashville, Tennessee. Sarah, would you wave to the audience so they know which one you are? Thank you.
Like I'm on Jeopardy now.
And Eliza Wren is a writer, filmmaker, and musician, both on her own and with the group Hans Mill. She is based in Austin, Texas, and Eliza composed and recorded a rock score for Return to Oz titled Eliza Wren Returns to Oz. Welcome, Eliza.
Hi.
And I'm J.L.Bell. I'm a former editor of Oziana magazine for the Oz Club and the moderator for this discussion. I'm the only person here who hasn't seriously studied filmmaking, so naturally I'm the one in control of the recording. Everything our panelists and I say in this conversation consists of our individual opinions as fans of Oz. We don't represent the Oz Club or its many other members, and we certainly don't represent the Disney Corporation, the makers of Return to Oz. So please take this conversation in the spirit of fandom. I'd like to start by asking our panelists about your first experience of Return to Oz. Were you already an Oz fan going in, or did it make you an Oz fan? What do you remember about the movie's pre-release publicity, if anything, and how you felt about the way other people responded when it came out? And I'll start with Eliza.
Okay. So I was 5 years old when it came out, and actually my sister won a coloring contest, and the prize was we got to go to like the premiere in Austin. It wasn't like, you know, the Hollywood one. Of the film, and I guess like, you know, and then she also got all this memorabilia, like this large lithograph that was framed and a whole bunch of books and things like that. And so, I mean, I was little, I probably had seen Wizard of Oz at that point, but I absolutely loved it. And it's funny because I think like maybe my mom thought it was a little strong or something like that. And so over the next few years, I always kind of wanted to see it again. She's like, well, that was, you know, that was a little much for you when you went to it. And so it's kind of this funny story. I mean, obviously, you know, the years went on and I was a teenager or whatever, but I remember one day when I was like going to college, I was in a video store and I saw Return to Oz and I went, hey, I could... There's nobody to tell me not to watch this. It's not too scary. And so I rented it, and you know, it had made such a huge impression on me. Things like the Wheelers and things that I was like, was it really high pictured it? You know, and I had to like see it again, and it was, and I was like, it really made an impression on me that time, and that's when I decided to do the score to it. I was just kind of like messing around with it, but I watched it so many times that time when I rented it. And so it kind of became a part of my life at that point.
Terrific. And Sarah, what's your experience?
My experience is really different, but similar a little bit. I certainly didn't go to any premieres, but I lived out, first of all, I'm too young to have seen Return to Oz in a theater. I was alive, but I would have been a very, very small child at the time. And so my awareness of Return to Oz is really through those magical mediums of the repeat TV broadcast and the home video. And I really can't tell you which one came first because my grandparents had the Disney Channel, and Return to Oz was kind of a constant on the Disney Channel in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. But we also had family friends who ran a small video store just a few miles away from us. We lived in rural Tennessee, so there wasn't much near us. And that video store had sort of all the live action Disney movies, ranging from your big hits like Mary Poppins to the ones nobody remembers, like the Gnome Mobile. And in there was Return to Oz. So I can't tell you whether I saw it one place or the other first, but I do know that when I saw it, I had already read the books. I had already read Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz. And so to me, that was just terribly exciting. It was terribly exciting that John Arneal's Oz, and so by extension, Alfred Baum's Oz, was there on a TV screen. And I could rewind it and I could watch it again and again, and I could look for those characters and that I recognized from the illustrations, so on. So I do know in pretty short order, I had an extended play tape, for anyone who remembers extended play videos, where my grandfather had taped like 90% of Return to Oz, like no beginning credits, almost no end credits, right? And it was a 6-hour tape, and the music sounded really bad in extended play, but I just watched that thing again and again, and I would act out little parts. I would, very enthusiastically, like, be Mombi to my mother, or the bit where Jack Pumpkinhead calls for his mother. I remember doing that sort of highly embarrassing thing. So yes, like Eliza, I saw it again and again and again, and it probably entered my consciousness in a very similar way to the way the MGM movie did for people of my mother's generation. So I certainly would have gone and seen it in a theater if I'd been old enough to do it.
And Eliza, did Return to Oz turn you into an Oz fan, or would you count yourself mostly as a Return to Oz fan?
It's interesting because I think I kind of treat it separately than I do the Wizard of Oz. In my mind, I was a fan of the particular film, and I'm also a fan of the particular Wizard of Oz film. But even though I'm aware of their obvious, connection, I don't know, I just kind of think of them as separate works. So, I'm a huge Frank Oz fan, actually. And so that also helped, which I always thought was kind of funny.
That's a good point.
But yeah, I don't know. I liked that it didn't feel like the rest of the movies that came out. It definitely feels like an 80s movie. And, I know there's things like Labyrinth and things like that, but it's still, I liked how they just kind of said, it felt like they just like read the book and they said, this is how we're going to do it. And we're going to kind of ignore Wizard of Oz, like her age is different, and, it's more accurate and things like that. But I like that they kind of did that, and they didn't go, oh, well, we need to make it this way. We need to make it this way. We need to make it this way. So I feel like it was kind of created in a separate spirit, and I kind of think of it as I'm a fan of it in its own realm.
And when you look back at Return to Oz today with your professional background, your maturity, what are the biggest changes in how you feel about it? Do you recognize certain flaws, or are you recognizing new strengths, or just different? So Sarah first.
Yeah. I got interested in film and filmmaking when I was a teenager. And I thought I was going to be a filmmaker for a while. Like, I'm fairly sure almost every kid thinks they're going to be a filmmaker for a while now. But I do teach film now. I don't teach Return to Oz because I don't teach, the scope of what I teach is fairly limited to kind of big movies, well-known movies, things my students are going to recognize. Although I've shown a clip or two. However, teaching film has made me appreciate it more and appreciate it on more levels. And I think crucially what I've really been able to identify is that it's so separate from MGM's Wizard of Oz, kind of like Eliza was saying, in the sense that MGM's Wizard of Oz is a beautiful piece of studio filmmaking, of classic studio filmmaking, where it's really kind of put together by a factory. There's not a single vision overseeing that. And we could dissect that for a while, but at bare minimum, The Wizard of Oz has 5 directors. Mm-hmm. Return to Oz doesn't. It has 1 director, and although there were some problems with that, Walter Murch claims that the movie you're watching is his movie, that he had final cut. And it looks to me like a movie where the director had final cut. There are many Disney movies around this period where the directors did not get final cut, where Disney brought in a new editor or something else to bring the length down or change the tone or something else. And that didn't happen here, and that fascinates me because it's the only Oz project I've seen, you know, film-wise, where I feel like I am watching 90% one man's vision, and that really interests me now.
Okay, I'd like to come back to that. Eliza, what about you? I know you've watched the movie, at least in snippets, hundreds of times now as part of your project. How do you look at it differently from 35 years on?
Well, like I said, I mean, it was a very striking movie. I mean, I've seen movies that have had like really striking, interesting characters over the years, but it didn't stick out quite like this one did. And I do have to say that now my memory of the movie is definitely skewed in that the original audio of the movie I've heard, you know, in comparison with not hearing the original audio, it's been so few times. So what I say might be affected by that a little bit. But yeah, like I said, it felt like it really stood out as something really different, really independent. And I know that for some people it was a little too dark or too maybe too kind of deep in some places. But it doesn't. I was surprised later, even though it says Disney at the beginning, it didn't quite hit me. But I was kind of surprised it was a Disney movie. It didn't feel like that. And I really like it when they make things for real. Like I prefer claymation over CGI for one thing. And I'm also kind of it's kind of a hobby of mine. I like to watch films and like notice the mistakes, like, oh, there's an arm there, or you can see the bottom where the chain comes out and things like that. But I didn't notice that too much on this. Like I said, the audio I can't speak for as much. But it just seemed they just kind of created their own sort of universe, and I really appreciated that. I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but after Sarah was talking, I forgot the exact question.
Well, as a filmmaker, and have you gotten a new appreciation of the actual technical feat of the movie, or as Sarah was talking about, the style that came through?
I mean, yeah, I guess that's a kind of a strange question. I'm sorry. Like I said, I guess I like that I felt like they took it from the context of the story rather than the context of all other movies made. And that sort of thing I really appreciated.
Okay. Sarah, you were talking about the Walter Murch's vision, and of course, Murch had worked with, you know, the great American filmmakers of the 1970s, that burst of creativity, and to use a possibly bad word, auteurism. And so here was his vision, and yet it was a very troubled experience for him, from what we hear, from what we read. How do you think that affected, do you think that comes across on the screen in any way? Or do you think that in the end, it's, as you say, his vision?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that directly, because at the end of the day, we don't know entirely what happened. We do know what various people have said, including the producer, Gary Kurtz, and Walter Murch himself.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think is really profoundly interesting is this is this man's only film that he directed. And it was an extremely stressful experience, but he still is willing to talk about it, and he still seems proud of it. And that is interesting. That's really interesting to me. Murch is an incredibly accomplished guy. He's a renowned audio editor in particular, but also a visual editor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really stands out in the film. I think it is edited very well, even though he isn't the credited editor. He clearly had his eye on it. I have seen many a children's film from this period with somewhat lackadaisical editing that will render action sequences kind of sodden, and that doesn't happen here. I think everything's kind of working in concert. The main issue that I see that hobbles the film, well, there's two. One of them is that they ran out of budget, or that the budget was kind of shut down on them. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure if those things is quite true, but at any rate, he wasn't able to fulfill every aspect of his vision. So, for instance, one of the really obvious things that you can notice in the film is that the Scarecrow doesn't have as manipulatable a head as he was supposed to. The face was supposed to have animatronics. And in some scenes, it's just frozen. In some, it's clearly a half mask. They did what they could. So there are aspects like that, particularly when it comes to the Emerald City or the Gnome Kingdom, where they've clearly had to cut some corners. So that's one thing. And I think at a certain level, that was just out of everyone's control based on what happened. The other one I think, though, that really hobbles it is the reliance on the MGM movie. Not the stuff that's necessarily in Murch and Gil Dennis's script, like the Kansas counterparts and the Oz counterparts. I think they might have gotten away with that. But the decision, I believe fairly late in the day, to lampshade it all by including the ruby slippers does something to the movie where nobody's going to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Who love the MGM movie aren't going to be happy. The people who love the books aren't going to be happy. It's just never going to quite meet. And for all I know, that was a suggestion that Murch made. I really don't know who made that call. I do know that it doesn't exist in every version of the script. So someone decided at some point. And I think it's a decision that maybe pulls the emphasis of the film kind of the wrong way for a lot of viewers. Otherwise, though, I feel like you're watching his movie, and you're watching his movie in exactly the way he intended it.
Okay. Since then, we've seen a lot of other visions of Oz, Wicked being the most successful, but also the TV series Tin Men, the Oz the Great and Powerful movie, lots of animated versions and so on. Looking back at Return to Oz through the tunnel of those others, does that give us a different perspective? Does that show us, how hard it is to make a vision of Oz, or how back in 1985 people would complain, oh, it should have been Silver Shoes, but we didn't know how good we had it to see, Tommy Quickstep on the screen, how accurate an Oz adaptation could be. And Eliza, do you want to start with this?
Sure. I really appreciate, I think in almost everything I personally enjoy, like comedy and, any other kind of drama, fantasy, I really appreciate kind of realism in acting, the way that stories are told. And, as unrealistic as the world around you isn't relevant to if the actual characters are being real in this unreal world. And I think Return to Oz does that very well. I even think, Wizard of Oz is obviously a masterpiece, but it even kind of has that kind of polishedness to it. And Return to Oz had a real sincerity. I mean, definitely Oz the Great and Powerful didn't have it. It has other things that are, you know, going for it in its own way and things like that. But there's just that sort of separation between here's this really interesting visual world that we have with all the puppets and everything, and then here's just the true actors just reacting to everything in a really pure and simple way. And I think that really stood out, and that really separates it. I haven't seen everything that you mentioned, so I can't speak on like The Tin Man or Wicked, but there's something else I saw too. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Okay. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, because I wasn't there, I don't have total insight to kind of the community's reaction to Return to Oz when it came out. I can say though that when I talk about Return to Oz in a crowded room, there's usually somebody older than me who feels a need to remind me why I can't possibly love Return to Oz. And so I actually have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of the criticism about Return to Oz is less about what it is and much more about what people expected and what they wanted it to achieve. So I don't think there's probably an Oz Books fan alive who isn't pleased to see Tommy Quickstep in the coronation sequence, or the Frogman, or Patchwork Girl, or any of the others. They're pleased that there's a girl in the courtyard reading a copy of The Marvelous Land of Oz for about a split second, right? What they're unhappy about is one of two things or both. That nobody is singing, that it's not sort of a light vaudeville, you know, family film in the vein they were expecting. I mean, I lent my DVD to a really good friend recently, and she watched it in two halves. And between the halves, she talked to me and said at one point, just really plaintively, "They're never going to sing, are they?" I said, "No, they're never going to sing." So there's that expectation. But also then, I think maybe that expectation would have been overwritten if it had been a massive success. I think many of the things that people say about Return to Oz, that it's too dark, that it's too scary, that it isn't kind of L. Frank Baum's Oz or MGM's Oz, those are all applicable to Wicked, even the Broadway musical Wicked. And that's massively popular. So you don't, and it's wonderful in its own way, but you just don't hear it criticized like you hear Return to Oz criticized. And so I have to think that some of this is simply Return to Oz having to bear the weight of not being a mainstream popular success. And it's still kind of suffering from that 35 years later, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And also the fact that it came from Disney. So it's like here's the big company that you would expect it to have certain things. But yeah, if you could just take it with a pure intention of watching the movie, I think you might have a different impression.
Well, and the odd thing for me is that it's a Disney movie, right? So it's always going to be there, right? It's always going to be the big Oz Disney movie that was made at this time, and it's not going to be something that people just really easily forget in the way they forgot, I don't know, Journey Back to Oz, for instance, which was a Filmation project and just much easier to kind of put over there somewhere. Return to Oz is going to be there. It's on Disney Plus now. And so I don't really see the point of not embracing it for what it is rather than pushing it aside for what it isn't.
One thing that often people will complain about is the darkness, supposedly the scariness of maybe the Wheelers, maybe Princess Mombi with her head off, maybe but particularly the electroshock therapy scenes at the beginning, which now all of those, one could also say, you know, generations of Americans have grown up scared of the flying monkeys. So it's not that scariness and Oz are not connected, but what about Return to Oz makes people think that it's dark or scary, or is it just the fact that it wasn't that huge success as you were talking about, Sarah? And Sarah, why don't you address that first?
Okay. So I think there's really two levels of scary in this movie. And the first one is, the Wheelers, Princess Mombi with her head off, the gnomes coming out of the walls, stuff like that, Oz stuff. And yes, the Oz stuff is scary, but it's no more scary than those winged monkeys were to baby boomers in the 1950s and 60s. It's just moved about a generation on. And it's the kind of scares that, we talk about kids hiding behind the sofa. They want to re-engage with it. They want to see just how far they can push it, right? It's a movie scare. The electroshock and really a lot of the Kansas stuff is a more existential scary. And most 80s fantasy films have some element of this, but this one's particularly vivid. And Walter Murch himself has talked about that's the really scary part. The scary part is the reality. It's nothing about the fantasy, and I think he's right. I regret the electroshock just because I feel like it's a barrier for people. It's a barrier for people to enjoy the rest of the movie. But I do think it's there for a reason, and that it is really something he's talking about in terms of needing to believe in yourself and not trust in other people to save you, not even trusting your parents to save you necessarily, or your parental figures. And so it's there to intentionally put Dorothy and Dorothy's fantasy world in danger. That is very unlike the MGM film. The MGM film has this message of, anything I've ever looked for is in my own backyard. That is a very different message. And so I think that is disturbing, unsettling, but it's really not vastly different from, say, The Never-Ending Story, another big 80s fantasy film, which is about death consuming us all.
Especially the horse.
Right. Yes. So it's very much in line with other movies of that type.
So one thing about that, I was going to say, when I was a kid, the shock therapy stuff didn't even affect me. I didn't get it. So I don't think that really affects kids too much. I have noticed that there's been a few times when I've watched this with adults where they're just kind of like, whoa, I can't believe this is in a PG movie kind of thing. And it's kind of like the hiding from reality. It's like how a lot of cartoons now, back in the day we used to have Coyote being blown up, but now the cartoons are like, what color of balloons are we going to get for the birthday party, And so I think that there's like this kind of middle ground where it's like, what can you do? And that was, the books were, they followed these times of like really hard, realistic kind of escaping reality. So they kind of had that in there for sure. So that's one thing about the shock therapy. I think that it affects adults more than kids. But yet, sometimes to really make a point, you do need to get some of the reality in there. But one thing I was going to say that's kind of funny is all of the Princess Mombi and the heads. Like, the Wheelers are just about as scary as the monkeys. Like, you're just like, okay, here's a new creature. They're definitely scary. But I think like the removal of a head can affect people maybe in such a blatant, like long going of that might have affected people a little bit strong. But it's funny because my kids, like when I first did this, I was actually pregnant with my first kid. And then they kind of grew up watching Return to Oz. And a lot of it they watched with music because I had to keep working on it or doing it and they'd go to the shows. And so they really got used to that head like removal thing. And there was another film that I was working on where it was kind of a play on thing of the Country Bear Jamboree, and we had all these heads on our walls. And then the heads were taken off the people down below. So it's so funny because just on a personal level, my kids are so used to like heads coming off. I think for a long time they thought that everybody could just unscrew their own heads. And, we'd go to, I remember once we were trick-or-treating at like kind of a place where it's like walk in and see this haunted house, and they had all these like heads hanging, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, they understand. Nothing here that they haven't seen before. So
That's interesting. Now I remember very vividly the footage of Mombi taking off her head, and you could see through her neck. And then a few years later, Death Becomes Her came out with Meryl Streep having a hole through her body thanks to this marvelous new technology called CGI. And now we have, through motion capture and CGI, we're just seeing things on screen that would have been impossible to do before. And I'm wondering if kids these days can appreciate how much it took to make a TikTok.
That I can't say, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, TikTok had to be made with an acrobat bent over in double and inside this little sphere. And now you could just do a TikTok with a few equations. But it's not the same, is it?
That's an interesting question, because I think no matter what, there will never be the right amount of appreciation for films that are, these segues into the future, or like we're done before technology. Because even though you can be aware and be like, oh, I know that they did that, I know it's really hard, I know they didn't have this technology, but there's still part of your brain that like just sees the other and still will always compare. You know what I mean? Like when people go, that is one of the greatest films, and people are like, but it's old and it has these plot points that we've seen a million times. You're like, yeah, but that was the first time that was seen. And I think there's always in filmmaking like a level that you can never really get your head pure to really give it the appreciation for what it had at the time. But yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I'm such a tremendous fan of practical effects. And this is made in the age of the original Star Wars movies and Blade Runner and Close Encounters and Neverending Story and any number of other movies with these really beautiful, predominantly practical or optical effects. And to my mind, nothing replaces that, because you can see the depth on a screen in a way that you can't see CG, and you have to appreciate the enormous amount of talent that brings something like TikTok to life. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, that essentially we have an immobile or a non-human character, okay, who can only walk and turn his head. He has no facial expressions, really. He has eyelids and this great eyelid sound effect that gives you an impression of facial expressions. He has no mouth. He doesn't really even have good control of his arms. And yet there's a lot of life in that character, and it's down to the acrobat inside him, it's down to the person controlling the head, it's down to the voice, it's down to the music. He has this wonderful march that in the original film, a march that he walks in time to, which makes him feel more mobile than he really is. And so you get these wonderful things where there's a one shot in the movie where TikTok looks around the corner. And I just want you to think about that for a moment, because there's no way for TikTok to look around a corner. But the movie is very successful through the combination of all these elements and camera angles to make you think the character is looking around a corner. And today it would just be CG, and it would be perfect. And I honestly don't think kids care one way or another, until they're teenagers. When they're teenagers, they start to care. When they're teenagers, things start to become cool or not. But kids really just want something that feels real to them. And for my money, the artistic one is the one that actually took effort, real effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a good time to talk about favorite moments in the film that you recommend people enjoy when they look at it again. For instance, what is another favorite technical aspect of what they put on screen? And then I'll ask about a favorite moment of performance by the actors. But Sarah, you just talked about how TikTok peeks around the corner and how we can appreciate that in new ways? Is there another technical aspect you think, that you do not miss this? Do not miss this bit of cleverness.
Yeah, don't miss the Gump's feet, because the Gump has feet.
Now, in the books, the feet are the only part of the Gump that is not alive.
Well,
but
they're alive now.
Okay, so you watch the feet.
There's only a few shots where you can see them, but he has distinctly little sofa feet, and they actually have little sort of like clasped toes, and they move like feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's maybe 3 shots, and they're pretty much all on the Gnome King's Mountain. And I didn't see it until I saw the movie on a really big screen, and I just love the fact that somebody thought to give the Gump's feet a personality. That just makes me really happy inside. And there's lots of kind of little moments like that. I love the bits of humor that creep in through kind of either camp, some of the camp performances have these little moments of humor. One of my favorites is the way the Gnome King sort of like tucks his toes in with the ruby slippers. Like he just really enjoys wearing those. Or the Hall of Heads. They never say anything, but they're judging you with their eyes. Right? The whole time they're saying everything with their eyes. And I just love that sort of, I guess some of that's performance, but there's got to be multiple people involved to make those moments happen and then keep them in the film.
And Eliza? Anything stick out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, hands down, I would say just kind of almost all the Mombi parts of her castle when she first walk in. You go that and when you see her Hall of Heads when she's trying to get the key from her while she's laying down. Just kind of all of those moments were extremely striking to me. They're just kind of undeniable moments. And so, I mean, I guess I would hail the technicality of the heads, the whole head scenario. And, I know it's not perfect, but it's definitely impressionable, and it leaves nothing to the imagination. So I really appreciated that. On the acting side, like I said, I feel kind of at a disadvantage to talk about it a little bit because the audio is kind of not a part of my opinion right now. But I mean, I actually was impressed by Feruza's realism and kind of just patientness and like waiting to hear from the other characters and what they said. And I mean, the other one is just, when he's the doctor and the Rock King, and that sort of gentle sort of creepiness that he played, I think was another thing that really stuck out to me. Anyway, yeah. Cool.
And Sarah, any performances you particularly want to recommend?
Yeah, I want to build on that a little bit because I do think Feruza she really keeps the film grounded. She has such extreme naturalism. I mean, there's so many terrible child performances on film, throughout history, but you believe in Feruza intensely. You don't think of her I don't ever think of her as somebody who's acting. I really believe in her emotions, which, even as a kid, I didn't always feel about kids in movies. And that's in contrast to the very, very big performances of everybody else, right? To the point where I'm fairly sure Jean Marsh, who was a very respected actress, complained that she was told to really camp it up as Mombi and didn't always feel thrilled about that. The one that always gets me, I mean, I love Mombi's, incredibly dramatic, so when she catches Dorothy, getting her powder of life. But the one I love even more is Nicole Williamson's Gnome King. Nicole Williamson was a theater actor, notoriously, apparently hard to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Not in that many movies. He did a great Hamlet in the 60s. He was Sherlock Holmes in the 70s. Perhaps the single most other striking film he ever did was Excalibur, in which he does surreal line readings as Merlin. Like, the emphasis is nowhere anyone would ever normally put it. It's amazing. But he really goes for it, and he really goes for it big. And you have to. He's covered in like layers and layers and layers of makeup, and sort of kind of a Santa Claus figure, and wearing ruby slippers for a little while too. So he really has a performance that matches what he's doing. And I think it's not even so much the individual performances, it's that they're all there together. You've got Fairuza on the one end, very staunch naturalism, and then these like thesps way up here somewhere, just like, you know, shouting at the back of the audience. And that dichotomy, I think, is, maybe it's not art, but it's incredibly entertaining.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to close by asking about the projects, the Return to Oz projects you each have worked on. Eliza, your Return to Oz score, I understand, is available for downloading from Apple, and that people can buy CD copies. Tell us a little bit more about how that came about, and give us the URL or any other way that people can enjoy that.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, when I had checked out that copy, you know, later in my college years, it was true, kind of all the memories I had of it. I was like, this was a really interesting movie, how I remembered it. And I was just kind of messing around with it, and I found a lot of the songs that I had already done like fit with it really nicely. And so I kind of decided about that time to write a score for it. And obviously I was aware of the whole Pink Floyd with the Wizard of Oz thing. You know, and this was obviously very purposeful. This wasn't necessarily an accident. I mean, the other wasn't, we don't know if it was an accident or not, kind of thing. But, you know, obviously this was all on purpose. But I think it also really even amped my appreciation for the movie, just like watching it over that many times. And that's a huge compliment too, because I usually don't even like to watch movies twice. So for me to watch a movie 500 times, you know, it's definitely a compliment. But yeah, so it was 3 years in the studio. We didn't have it like hooked up to Adobe or anything like that. It was literally like we recorded it, and I went home and I watched it with a movie, and I said, okay, symbol hit number 14 is 0.4 seconds off, so let's move it. And, you know, extremely tedious. But, you know, in the end, you know, it's something that I'm proud of. And, you know, a couple of people have asked me, are you going to do another film? And I definitely haven't, like, you know, ruled it out. But I don't care about, like, just continuing a series. It's just, this was something special I made at a time, and I, you know, appreciate what it is for what it is. So, yeah. Any like linkage to anything physical or download is all just on my website, which is elizawren.com. I don't know if you're putting a spelling of it, but
I could try.
elizawren.com. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say the first performance, we premiered it at Sundance, and Fairuza was there, and she introduced the whole thing. Yeah. And then we've been, it's kind of had these little spotty tours ever since. Yeah, anyway, there you go.
Okay, we hope we'll catch them. And Sarah, I understand you're working on an issue of the Balmbugle all about Return to Oz. So what can we expect from that, and how can we get it?
Well, I've turned off my background now, so I can show you some things. But for anyone who doesn't know, the Balmbugle is the triannual research journal of the International Wizard of Oz Club. If you're a member, you already get it. And if you sign up as a member today, this is the first 2020 issue you'll get. This is our current issue. And isn't that lovely? It's about 48 pages of good Oz stuff. In autumn, as our eminent host has said, we're going to have a lot of Return to Oz content. It's going to be kind of the party nobody knew they needed or wanted. But we're going to have a really good time. We're going to talk about Michael Sundin, We performed TikTok. Somebody's written a really wonderful piece about his life. We're going to look at the music of Return to Oz. We're going to look at the novelizations of Return to Oz. Those are pretty cool. We're going to talk about why it's an incredibly scary and lonely film and you should love it anyway. And there might even be 1 or 2 surprises in there. It's going to be a really, really good time, I think. So if you don't have it already, if you're not already a member and you want the Balmbugle, I want you to go www.ozclub.org and sign up. And we're hoping that's going to come out right around Halloween so that everybody has more of a Halloween than it looks like we're set to otherwise.
Okay. Well, look for Jack Pumpkinhead around Halloween then. Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Eliza. We'll look forward to seeing you virtually and really at other Oz events in the future. And now, for everyone watching, back to the next installment of the To Oz virtual convention. Take care. Hi, folks. As a special bonus, we're going to talk with Freddie Fogarty about Return to Oz. Now, 5 years ago, I had the pleasure of working with Freddie on OzCon when that was the 30th anniversary of Return to Oz. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun. And now we're going to talk with Freddie about the 35th anniversary. So, Freddie, what was your first experience of Return to Oz, and how did it affect you or change you as an Oz fan?
Yeah, so my first movie theater experience that I remember as a child is going to see Return to Oz with my dad in the summer of 1985. So I'd be almost 4 years old. So I have a distinct memory of seeing it in the theaters and absolutely loving it. And it became the thing where as soon as it came out on home video at Main Street Video in El Segundo, I would rent it every single time. And again and again. And, you know, I just, since I was a young child, I watched Return to Oz before I watched The Wizard of Oz. I've always loved it. I was never scared of it as a kid. I always just thought it was like one of the better adult movies. Being as a fan of Watcher in the Woods and other things like that, I enjoy a good dark Disney flick.
Okay. Yeah. And looking back, is there any element of the movie, a moment, a performance, a technical achievement that you really recommend people pay attention to if they were to watch Return to Oz? Something you think needs more appreciation?
Yeah, so when I tell people, I'm like, you know, Return to Oz was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Special Effects, and that's not saying nothing in 1985, you know. There were so many cool fantasy and sci-fi and horror movies in the 80s that really, you know, had good special effects, and so it's Will Vinton and his whole claymation team, and if you don't recognize him, he's the one that did all the California Raisins stop motion stuff, and, you know, they have an Academy Award nomination for it, and that's super great. So look out for that in the movie. You know, it really holds up well. It's good to see actual physical things instead of digital, you know, in a film. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, everything, you know, they hardly do anything like that, which is unfortunate.
Now, Freddie, you are known for your Return to Oz and other Oz collections. Last year, I had the pleasure of seeing them in a museum in El Segundo, and I'm seeing them now. So I'd like to ask you to share some of your Return to Oz favorites with us today.
Sure, absolutely. So I pulled them down, and it's not going to be a shock to Return to Oz people, you know, but like my TikTok, my heart and heart Japanese large plush TikTok doll is my favorite thing in my whole collection of every collection, you know, and he is just big and fantastic, and he was one of the leading things at the museum that people recognized and liked. And, you know, they're just so rare. And it's got the label and everything. I'd love his little counterpart, a little miniature version. And there's four other Heart and Heart, or maybe it's 5. They were sold for a couple weeks basically at Tokyo Disneyland. And the only known sets are from someone who went there, an Oz collector, and put 2 suitcases full of them. So I'm so lucky to have this one. I'd love to have the rest of them, but this is my favorite guy. And, you know, he looks over my bed every night. I look up on TikTok. Gives me a little hello. Yeah.
That's terrific. And yeah. I see you've also got pins and lots of other things.
Oh, yeah. So original UK film promo given out at movie theaters opening weekend. There's 5 different pins like this. Reproduction Oz key. It's made from the same cast as the promo keys. It's not a real one. Little Etsy TikTok necklace, still available. and Johnny Rux's Return to Oz Shield logo pin that he just released, and he makes lots of fun pins.
Okay, so part of your collection is new stuff. There's still, even 35 years later, new Return to Oz memorabilia.
Yes, I'm just going to reach and grab. I mean, 35 years later, you know, I find, you know, the Greek Return to Oz VHS that I've never, ever seen before. There is stuff out there. But yes, there's new stuff too. Not technically licensed per se, you know, fan art and stuff like that. These fun little pins. You know, I don't think Disney's going to care if they're selling 50, but I would love for Disney, you know, to release some actual anniversary RTO stuff. It's still a possibility. Yay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll hold out for the 40th at least.
There we go. Exactly. I'll still be alive for a few more of them. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Freddie. And now we'll go back to the To Oz convention.